Yeah, and I think you wrote a good piece in Foreign Exchanges uh, about the unknowns of empire that I do think really hit at this tension that we're seeing, because in the piece you make the point, and as Dan Crenshaw does as well, people are no longer selling these things as nation building or humanitarian interventions. Yet the empire does continue to sort of march along. At least rhetorically within the Republican Party, and now in a lot of other arenas with the Biden administration. And that while there's been a kind of shift with the the Republicans and Trumpism, I think you've used the word for the Biden, like the foreign policy experts in the Biden administration, is sort of like on autopilot, like they're sort of lost as an ideological movement. How would you sort of like categorize the movement of the people who are really influencing the Biden policy and the kind of centrist wing of the foreign policy groupings?
Well, I think they're pursuing a strategy of hegemonic stabilization. I've said this in a few different places. We've talked about it on the podcast, and the sense that they understand the United States is either like not 1945, controlling 50% of world production. It's not 1991, where they're the only superpower. So they understand that it's never going to be able to dominate the world like it does. And I think there's probably a growing realization, slowly but surely. It's not like these people are the most necessarily thoughtful or have the most foresight, but I think there's a growing recognition that the U.S. won't fight World War III over Japan or South Korea or Taiwan. And so there's a growing recognition that at some point in the future, I think people probably think between 25 and 50 years, I probably say between 10 and 15 years, the United States won't be able to be the sole hegemon in East Asia. I think that's probably unrealistic. I think Hong Kong was part of like a gambit on that behalf of the CCP to see what would happen. And what happened? Nothing. Just like when Putin invaded Georgia and then Ukraine, what happened? Nothing, because the United States isn't going to fight World War III over these things. It's just not going to happen. So I think that there's a recognition that the power relationships are changing. But again, I think that what Derek was pointing toward is absolutely correct, that the structures, the bases are mostly going to remain the same. And I think what's interesting is I'm not sure if someone like Samantha Power believes in like the utopic vision of humanitarian intervention or responsibility to protect, because it's just not possible. And I think you saw it in the fact that I think about a week ago, South Sudan, Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, joined the ICC, and Samantha Power had this extremely obnoxious tweet like, could you believe Sudan joined the ICC? Yes, the Sudan joined the ICC, and Ilhan Omar retweeted, like maybe one day the United States, yes, the United States will join the ICC, right? And that's just not something that would have happened 10 years ago, right? So like even within the Democratic Party, you have people just essentially pointing to facts and being like, this is just total bullshit. So there's no utopia anymore. And so without a utopia, I'm not sure that an ideology could survive. And liberalism just certainly, what's their utopia? Climate change, but a little slower. I mean, like it's an ideology without a core. And I think, something is going to replace it. What that is, I have no idea. But that's where we are. At least that's how I view it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think the liberal heyday of the 90s kind of, transitioned into the war on terror. And we've come out of that really without an organizing principle, or scrambling to find a new organizing principle. There is this push, although, Danny, as you say, there's a realization that the United States isn't going to fight a war with China, but there is this push to create a new Cold War with China, which is an impossibility, I think, because you're not talking about two fundamentally different and separate systems of economics and governance. You're talking about two countries whose economies are totally intertwined with one another, practicing some form of capitalism on some level. I just don't think it's possible to kind of sustain the level of opposition and separation that the Cold War involved. And it's all kind of, it's just silly to me. I mean, you talk about what, is the United States going to be able to maintain hegemony in East Asia in 50 years? In 50 years, the South Pacific is going to be underwater, and we're going to have a lot of other problems to deal with. Like, who cares? And to some extent, it's a failure of imagination, I think, or maybe a failure of what's possible, to not see that the big issues coming up are things that we need to organize everybody around. We need to organize around a really like long shot ditch to avoid the worst effects of climate change. We need to worry about pandemics. We need to worry about these kinds of things. And there's just no kind of appetite for that, it seems like.
And the grim thing is, and I don't know what you guys think, I'll throw it back to you on your own podcast. But the grim thing is, I don't see another sort of transnational consciousness available. And that's the scary part, right? I don't think there's like a transnational working class consciousness waiting to be activated. So I don't know what comes next. And also it was Sudan that joined the ICC, not South Sudan. So correcting myself. But yeah, curious what you guys think about that.
Well, I mean, I feel like that leads kind of into the next topic I wanted to bring up, which is, well, do you want to say something first, David, on that?
Well, no, I think I know where you're going. So I will say that, for me, the only real, I mean, not only, but the most encouraging moments that we're seeing right now are coming in South America. And in there, it's interesting though, from like, I would imagine from like a historical perspective, to see the United States and China, if they are like, these are the two superpowers sort of battling it out, the way that they're interacting with countries like Peru, for example, right, is the Chinese are playing a very different game than the Americans have been, when there was a lot of worries, for example, that the U.S. State Department was going to do another kind of Bolivia move in Peru when the election was close. And they sort of backed off. Meanwhile, China has been very, very open to that part of the world, but not always necessarily in a, just purely uninterested way, right? They get a lot from that part of the world too. So I agree, though. I mean, at the same time, like we're talking about a few countries that have some left-wing populist movements. That's not the grand horizon of global world communism. It is a weird political moment to sort of figure ourselves on an international scale.